Welcome to the next edition of Grid Forward Forum. I'm Bryce Yonker. Today we have with us a very exciting guest, U.S. Congresswoman Julie Fedorchak. Congresswoman, thanks for being on with us.
Thank you, Bryce. Excited to be here.
So maybe you can introduce yourself. You are the U.S. representative for North Dakota, but you have a little bit more than a decade in public service at a state utility commission. So maybe you can introduce yourself for the audience here.
Absolutely. So I most recently was elected in my first term as North Dakota's at-large member in Congress. I was elected in November, and I'm serving on the Energy and Commerce Committee, first freshman in 14 years, to get a spot there. We advocated hard for that position, largely because of my 12 years of experience as a state utility regulator. I was appointed to that position back in 2013 and then ran 3 times statewide in North Dakota. It's an elected role. Have, a lot of experience in a number of different areas in the utility sector. I spent 8 years as our state's liaison to the MISO market, worked my way through the leadership ranks in the organization of MISO states. So I served as president of that organization. Then also from the state perspective, we had our permitting responsibility in the Public Service Commission, and that was happening right during the Bakken oil boom. And so my agency was responsible for reviewing the permit requests for everything from new power lines to new pipelines, oil and gas pipelines, and new generation facilities. So wind, gas, permitted all of those. And also was involved in a lot of the other gas-related infrastructure. So I really appreciate the experience that I have on both the permitting side and the energy markets side, because I think therein lies some of our greatest challenges and opportunities to really growing our energy sector and meeting the needs of the citizens and the industries of the future.
Well, thank you for your service at the PSC and welcome to Congress. They're lucky to have such an expert in the industry. So maybe you can help me understand from your perspective, what are some of the dynamics and drivers that you're seeing in general in the energy landscape right now? What's driving activity? What's at the top of the priority list, even maybe impacting there for Congress that you guys are thinking about and working on?
Sure. So I think what's driving the industry right now is a pretty monumental change. I'll say when I first came into the commission, what was driving the industry was transition. And now, and that was transition from fossil-based resources to sort of renewable type resources, and then seeing kind of the early parts of that transition, and then seeing how the grid operators realize, like, oh, there's more to this than we might have originally expected. This is a little more complicated. We need to slow down a little bit. And then you saw the accreditation changes and the focus on, different constructs for resource planning, different focuses on transmission planning, all of that. So that was kind of all in the transition bucket. That was well underway. And then came a new overlay and a very new challenge, which is increased demand. All of the transition was happening with flat demand that had been, the state of the industry for, a decade or more. And then you overlay with the whole urge to transition a increase in demand, and a significant increase in demand. And now you've got a whole new level of challenges and a whole new bucket of things to do. And so I think that now, rather than being a transition, I think we're much more as an industry needing to focus on an expansion. This is an energy expansion, no matter how you look at it. And those bring different challenges. Some of them are the same. Among the same challenges are permitting reform and permitting, because permitting has been a challenge all along. And it takes too long a lot of it is federal permits and the NEPA requirements and the different federal agencies sort of stumbling over each other, tripping each other up and slowing down projects. So you've got the permitting challenges. You also have people, the public generally getting a little intolerant in some cases of some of these new projects. You've got the NIMBYism occurring. You've got some folks who just don't want certain types of resources. And honestly, those people exist on both sides. Some people don't want wind, don't want solar, and some people don't want gas, don't want pipelines, don't want anything fossil based. So you've got those challenges that have been ever present. And then you have the new challenge of needing to bring on a lot more generation faster than we've ever done it before. And so I think that that's perhaps those two things are really what we're focused on, at least I am in Congress. And I know a lot of my colleagues on E&C are as well, especially those with kind of an energy focus. We want to tackle permitting reform, and we want to find a way to help support bringing on more power to meet this really growing demand, and meet it in a way that allows us to maintain our edge in AI and address the national security implications of countries like China nipping at our heels in that very important industry.
So if you're going to bring up permitting reform, maybe I'll just ask a quick follow-up on that. It seems to have always been the next bill. As long as I've been working in this space, we really haven't been able to actually address it. And it really can't be a part of the reconciliation package. So do you have a sense as to when it gets prioritized, how it gets prioritized? Because it's not really the one that's being directly worked on at the moment. Is it something this Congress or kind of what does the timeline look like?
Oh, I think most definitely this Congress. And I do think that there is more work happening behind the scenes than might be evident. Bruce Westerman did a lot of work in the last Congress and has a lot of ideas, and is definitely hard at work trying to figure out how we're going to tackle this. I know Representative Guthrie is also weighing in on that and very interested in it. I have a meeting with Bruce Westerman, I think next week, we talked, when I was pitching myself for different committees, and met with Bruce, and he was saying, I really want you on natural resources because of your background, and, your help would be great on permitting. And I said, no matter where I land, I want to work on permitting. So I think there will be bills brought forward on permitting reform to get after that in this Congress, and hopefully sooner versus later.
Great. So let's compare kind of recent role to current role. What do you see the role as federal government versus the role that the states and localities and really companies that are operating with those localities? What's the role between these different jurisdictions in deploying energy and grid infrastructure? Who owns what areas? Where's the collaboration? Where's the overlap? Maybe where's the friction that we need to get rid of?
Well, that is very interesting. And being relatively new to this role, my opinion on that will probably change over the course of the next couple of years. But at the very core, I'm a states' rights person, and I really believe strongly in the states' processes. As it relates to just my initial feeling on whose role is what, I think that our role as the feds right now, we need to be doing everything we can to get out of the way, to get federal regulations out of the way, get federal processes out of the way, and help facilitate more rapid development of our energy resources, bringing on more generation online and more infrastructure to support this generation and distribution of power faster than we've ever seen it before. So there probably might be in that process a need to rethink some of the shared responsibilities between the state and feds, but I don't have any policy positions on that quite yet. I think that I'm hoping that some of those sorts of friction points are revealed in the RFI we've sent out on the AI and energy working group that we've established. And so I want to hear more about those friction points through that, and then sort of overlay that with my thoughts as well. But I know we need to streamline some of the permitting. I think that there's some great ways to do that. I have some ideas I'll share with Bruce here before long. And then as it relates to generation, I will say just one area where I already think that the feds might have to step in, because I've talked to every single grid operator. The CEO of all of the grids were in DC this week, and I had one-on-one meetings with all of them, and each of them emphasized that one of the most important immediate things we need to be doing is to stop retiring resources that are already connected to the grid, before we have those resources replaced with others that can operate the same and provide the same reliability characteristics to the grid. But also just generally, we need so much more power right now. We can't afford to be turning things off. So that's an area that I'm looking at from a policy position to bring forward some legislation on in the near term.
Well, on repowering existing infrastructure, and I'm not going to go on AI yet because I think that'll take our entire time. So I'll save it for a few minutes later. But on repowering current infrastructure, I know the Loan Program Office was pretty active in something called the 1706 provision. Do you think some of those areas still have support? Because I know right now that there's a lot of interest to kind of cutting back federal resources.
Yeah.
But it seems like there are former programs that are very well aligned with the organization. So I don't know if you want to respond specific to that program or just generally where previous funding may be aligned. And there's a lot of questions right now around where it can continue.
And those are really great conversations that we're having as it relates to reconciliation. And my approach is we should take a scalpel to that, because I think there are areas where the federal government should be and probably needs to look at helping incentivize the most important investments that we need to kind of meet the demand of the now and moving into the future. But there's also areas that we probably need to pull back and are doing more harm than good. And so I think a scalpel is the right approach to that bill, or to the IRA stuff.
I could also tangent on that forever, but there's lots we want to talk about. I had been in my post last year for a decade, so I penned a piece on where kind of grid modernization was going. And at the end, I really kind of came back to some of the basics, right? Reliability in 5 years had doubled in the wrong direction, right? Mm-hmm. Outages were twice as high as they had been 5 years previous. And cost, we know how hot inflation's running for energy was higher than that.
Right.
So how do we balance quality of service with affordability? Really, the two basics of delivering energy services to customers.
Well, Bryce, you're singing my song. I think I have long said, and people say, "Oh, this is such a partisan area, energy policy," and I think it really shouldn't be. Because what everyone can agree on, regardless of which political party you support or direction, is we need reliable power, and it needs to be affordable for the people that are buying it, whether they be individuals or businesses. Those are just two common sense things. Everything else we do needs to be filtered through those two filters. And so developing new technologies. I think why we saw the growth in reliability challenges and price is because we got ahead of those two foundational principles. We have to bring new technologies that we bring on have to be proven to be reliable or brought on in a way that doesn't jeopardize reliability. And we need to make sure that these resources are also affordable. In my state of North Dakota, how we did that was we did low-cost planning. And so we didn't replace things if it wasn't needed. We didn't add things if there wasn't a specific demand for new power. We didn't go out looking for new power. And when we did need to replace things or we did need new power, we made sure that we brought on the lowest cost solution. We have some of the lowest electric rates in the whole country in my state, and the highest reliability. And it's because we stand firm to those principles. You might also be surprised to know that we have like almost 30% of the electricity used, not just nameplate, but actual energy use is from renewable sources. So it is possible to bring on new technologies in a deliberate fashion that maintains reliability and affordability, but you can't be driven by arbitrary deadlines that are set by policymakers who do not understand how this works. And I think that that's where we've gotten in trouble in our country. Too many places. And you know what? Every single one of the grid operators that came in front of E&C this week said that exact same thing. The biggest challenge they have is policy. That's what's driving decisions versus economics, versus reliability, versus technology availability. It's policy issues. And when it comes to the grid, you can't get around the science. There's just no way to get around the physics of operating the grid.
Maybe we can go a little deeper on this. And I always like to frame this topic around aligning incentives, because operators deploy towards what they're incentivized to do.
Yeah.
And so how do grid operators and organizations that are deploying this grid infrastructure get the signals, the necessary and the correct signals that they need to make the investments that they're making? And how do those outcomes, how are those the outcomes that really the customers, the businesses, and the communities that they serve are looking for? I don't know if North Dakota has gone a long ways down performance-based rate making, but just really aligning incentives, I think, is really the critical piece to that.
I definitely agree with you on that. And I think I see it working a little bit more in the reverse than what you said. How do how do you give them the incentives? At least MISO, SPP, I think PJM too, they're responding to what their members are doing. So in MISO, the members, it's all vertically integrated utilities that are managed by state regulators mostly in the MISO system, except for Illinois. So the utilities with the state regulators develop their resource plans, and then they tell MISO, here's what we're going to do. MISO tells the utilities, here's what you all are telling us is your expected demand. And so here's how many megawatts. In order for us to, as a group, as a 15-state region, meet this demand, you all need to bring forward this many resources, accredited resources. And they even broke it down by seasons. And so they're trying to send a signal to the utility that this is what you need to bring in. It needs to be accredited. And then they have their rules for accreditation, et cetera. The utilities decide how they're going to meet that need. So the utilities get their incentives or their signals from the operator, the grid operator, by like how much capacity they need to bring. And then they get to decide how they're going to bring that capacity. And then those decisions are made with the regulator of like, okay, do we want to, if we need, say it's 100 megawatts, which is very small, but just for rounding purposes, 100 megawatts, how much of capacity do we want to bring that in? 1,500 megawatts of wind, because you only get 15% capacity rating for wind. Do we want to do it with 120 megawatts of gas, because you get more like 80% capacity rating for gas? Like, how do we want to do that? And that's a conversation that they have with their utility regulators. So, in terms of the incentives, I think the policy where things get a little bit crossways is when you have state policy that's directing certain things, and that sends a very clear incentive. You must do this. It's not even an incentive, it's just a law. Like, you have to meet this by this date. And so that starts driving what sort of resources get onto the grid and how much they cost. So those are incentives that I think can get misaligned with running a low cost, reliable grid in our regions and then across the country. And all of these things connect. Another big incentive that's been created is the federal incentives. And those, I think, also can be misaligned when you've got, production tax credits that are very, very generous. in place, that is a very strong signal to the market that we want more of this. And they're working. They've worked over the years. They've been in place a long time, and they're working and have worked. But right now, they are resulting in flooding the grid with almost 100% of the resources. Solar and wind and batteries are not what we're desperate for right now. Batteries, I would say we're pretty desperate for, but they're not long enough term yet. They're only 2 to 4 hour batteries. It's not long enough duration to really meet the needs. What the grid really desperately needs now is more dispatchable resources to back up all the renewables that have already been added in a rapid pace over the course of the last 15 years. We need that, and we need gas infrastructure. We need some way to store gas. None of that is being incentivized by the federal government right now. It's not really being even incentivized by the grid operators to the utilities. So there's some pretty big corrections that need to take place to get our incentives right to bring forward the kind of resources we need to maintain reliability and affordability.
Costly distribution upgrades, frequent extreme weather events, demand surging from an onslaught of distributed energy resources adoption. Do these challenges sound familiar? If so, you need Virtual Peaker's cloud-based distributed energy platform. We're empowering modern utilities with next-generation virtual power plant solutions to maximize the value of DERs. The Virtual Peaker platform unifies all aspects of DER management, from DERMS to customer engagement and demand forecasting. Learn more at virtual-peaker.com.
We're going to pivot a little bit. I think I know what your answer to this question will be. So I'm going to ask about, from your perspective, what are some of the top industries that you think are especially important to compete in, to make sure that the, U.S. economies remain, competitive in global energy, global markets?
Right. Well, obviously, we want to make sure that we're at the front of the pack on the development of the AI industry, and serving that power need is really, really kind of one of our most important tasks right now. So in order to do that, all the components to feed that industry are needed. We definitely need more in, domestic production of all of the grid technology, grid components. We need more transformers developed in our country. We need more gas turbines produced here and manufactured here. All of the components for any of the grid development, we need to bring back into the U.S. and produce more of critical minerals. We need a lot more of that. We need more pipeline materials, all of those things. We've lost our supply chains, and we need to rebuild that and bring it back to the U.S. And doing so, sort of like it's a chicken and egg, because you have to have more power to bring that stuff back, but you need that stuff to make more power. So it's not a small challenge.
Yeah, power electronics, switch gear, advanced inverters, all of it, advanced conductor, all of this stuff. These are global markets. How do you make meaningful progress on onshoring these industries? Because typically that takes a long time, right? But how do we start putting one foot in front of the other to get more domestic supply of these critical components?
Well, I do think that President Trump is using tariffs to help get us in that direction and create more incentive for developing those products here. And I think that's important. You have to have steel to build a lot of this stuff. So that's like a fundamental building block to so much of this. And so if we don't have a domestic steel industry, then we are missing one of the big building blocks. We have to get the critical minerals too. And that's another huge component. I think President Trump is trying to focus on that as well in a variety of different ways. And we need more research and development as well to make sure that we can develop those industries here in the U.S., use what we have. And research and development dollars, I think, are key to that too. It also comes back to the tax code, having good tax code, smart tax code that incentivize investment, reinvestment, research and development. That's a critical component. And that's another thing that we're determined, and we can do that through the reconciliation process and hopefully will. So, all of these things do tie together. There's no simple solution, silver bullet, but it's a lot of the things that I think are just fundamentals to good economics and building blocks to a strong economy. And we're hoping that American people are patient enough to let some of these policies come to fruition and be in place long enough to do good work.
I was going to mention 48C, 45X, big incentives, but they have onshored a lot of critical grid components. Are you feeling that those are potentially in the crosshairs, or do they have general kind of bipartisan support? A lot of the deployments have been in, communities that, are typically pretty Republican heavy, business friendly, locations.
Well, again, I think there's pretty widespread support for using a scalpel and focusing on, some of the things that are needed to get to the common goal that we all have and getting rid of stuff that doesn't make sense anymore. And so I'm hopeful that's the approach that we take. And I think there's pretty widespread support for that approach.
This is a pretty specific question. We didn't talk a lot yet about data centers with regards to the AI race, but this is where, the large load is really the demand is coming from. So curious to know, are you hearing about some interesting or exciting areas where data centers can maybe become more flexible in the operations that they have in the communities that they operate within? As you know, when they show up, especially in smaller communities, they're a big deal, or especially from a grid perspective. So how can those loads be maybe good grid citizens or more able to meet the needs of a local energy system?
Yeah, this is an area where we need to be really innovative and creative and still explore some of those different operating techniques to allow for more flexibility. But a couple things that I've heard about are, the data centers often bringing along their own backup generation so that if they need to go offline because there's a peak in demand or a winter storm or an outage someplace, that they can not exacerbate the problems by being this really heavy load that is not interruptible, but they can interrupt and have their backup generation. And so I think that's a key feature that they are exploring, and I think in many cases deploying already. And what that also does is when it isn't an emergency or there isn't a shortage, they can also bring forward that extra power if the operators need it for something else. And so it adds more megawatts to the system. The other thing is deploying AI to help AI be more energy efficient. And I've just this week met with some of the big players in this, and they said just using that has made their resources 35% more efficient just in like the first run. So that's only going to prove more powerful over time.
We're almost at our time, so I'll be quick on this one and then we'll ask our last question. I think we covered tax incentives and I think we covered loans. We haven't touched on rebates. We haven't touched on grid grants. But there's been quite a portfolio of support to help advance the capabilities of the grid in recent years. You've already mentioned a couple times, I think, the idea of using a scalpel. With the federal government really looking to be more responsible with resources that go to every function of society, it appears that the interest is to cut resources. And it feels like so much is on the table. But from an energy perspective, from a advancing the capabilities of a grid perspective, where do you see priorities in this Congress as the administration, and including as the administration addresses changes at some of the agencies right now? Is there aspects that you think are being prioritized and are being continued to be invested in, or maybe even areas that are further invested in?
Well, again, there's a couple things with this that I think are important to remember. One of the big drivers of this demand increase is AI. It's a huge driver. Those companies are not unable to pay for their own power needs. And so I don't think we need to be driving the federal government further into debt and taxing American citizens who don't have deep pockets to pay for incentives to help these folks with deep pockets meet their energy needs. I haven't heard a single one of them say they don't want to pay for what they use. They want to. They were willing to pay for this stuff. And so I'll be really careful and a pretty loud advocate for making sure that incentives we continue aren't going to folks that can afford to pay for these resources on their own. We need to incentivize, in my opinion, technologies that aren't proven yet, that can have promise to address future challenges and be used at scale. We need to incentivize with tax credits and incentivize investments from the private sector however we can with good tax code and policy. I don't see the need for significant grants and those types of giveaways to develop, and deploy our energy systems. I don't think that that's really where we need to go. We need to streamline the regulatory process, make sure that the folks who have the resources to invest and want to invest can do so without having to spend a ton of money on federal regulations. I'd rather reduce regulations, make it cheaper for them to do business than give them money to help them have to go through these expensive regulatory processes. So creating a better business environment that is lower cost, has a good tax environment, and incentivizing this investment in that way, I think goes a long way, while also helping and maintaining the other more direct federal incentives that are needed to help stimulate the development of some of the technologies that aren't commercially available yet.
And this is where we'll end. The pace of innovation in the energy space is, I think, exciting. A lot of these are sparked from the national labs or ARPA-E or National Science Foundation, and really great public-private partnerships to help move these capabilities through. As you well know, breakthroughs are hard, right? Mm-hmm. So the question is, how do we really commercialize and scale the solutions that are most needed to move our grid ahead? And what does that look like, again, with the federal partnership in working with industry to do that?
Well, I think we're at such an exciting time right now, because we do need solutions quickly. We need more power on the grid in a fast way. And we have folks who are really interested in it, who have the capability of investing in new technologies. So that's just a great combination for getting results and proving out some of these new technologies faster. I think we're going to see SMRs proved out quickly, because you're going to see people investing in them and then taking what's needed and learned from each project and applying it quickly to the next one to make it better, deploying AI to make things better, faster. So I think it's just a great combination of, you have the people involved, they're invested in and need this technology quickly. There's a lot of new technologies that are sort of on the verge of being commercially viable. So we're going to have investors in those new technologies willing to deploy them. If we can get out of the way and get this stuff permitted quickly and have the supply chains in place to develop the actual physical resources to deploy them, I think we're going to be in great shape.
Former state commissioner, current U.S. Congresswoman Julie Fedorchak.
Thank you, Bryce. Happy to talk anytime.
Thanks again to our season sponsor, Virtual Peaker. If you enjoy Grid Forward Forum, please follow us on your favorite podcast platform. Give us a like or a review, and tell your colleagues. You can listen to all episodes and learn more about our efforts to advance the grid at gridforward.org.